boss are talking to themselves, and they keep talking to them. Like, I am always astonished that they make these proclamations just to themselves. Like, for
It's
one,
an
the
echo
US,
chamber. They're bouncing this
the
off
US
of each other.
hasn't invited them to the table. The US is not going to invite them to the table. And they're like, we will be, when any peace deal is signed, we will have our troops on the ground. It's like, okay, dude, no, you won't. No, you won't.
And I mean, and which just part of the rationale there is that we know Russia will never agree with that, and the war will go on.
Yeah.
Right. Just by saying it, we know Russia will never accept that. Right. And so the war will go on, which is what we want anyway.
Well, maybe I'm making assumptions. I'll ask you, can they gum up the works? I mean, I know Kellogg is
absolutely
having them at the baby table, but
yeah, sure. All they have to do is for Kiev to say no diplomacy. We're going to continue fighting, right? Which is what Russia wants anyway. Russia wants to finish this on the ground. They don't want any terms imposed on them by some peace deal with Trump, because they'd have to say no anyway, right? And then the onus for the diplomatic failure would be on them, right? This is perfect for them. Now the failure can be presented by Trump as on Zelensky, and that gives Trump all the room he needs to do what he wants to do, probably, which is to walk away from this. Then Russia can just go for Kiev and finish this on the ground, and there'll be no wrangling over details, no talk of NATO or European or whatever troops on the ground, no more weapons for the Kiev regime, because there won't be a Kiev regime, right? That gives Russia the space. And Russia is preparing according to reports, take that for what it's worth, but very large offensives for this late spring and summer. Very large offensives, probably something in the direction of Kiev, right? That is entirely possible. At the very least, Zaporozhye city and other areas. Russia, at the very least, wants to take the rest of Donbass and Zaporozhye city and Kherson city across the Dnieper,
Odessa,
and finish driving the Kiev regime out of their Kursk incursion in Suja before there's any real diplomacy. And now the people are saying outright, we need a new leader in Ukraine, right? Yeah. We can't deal with Zelensky. And how is that going to be done, right? Zelensky is refusing to hold elections still. Supposedly, he spoke to Zaluzhny, who was exiled as the former Kiev regime's top general. He was exiled to a position of ambassador to the UK, which is not really what he's doing there. He's there in political exile. But supposedly Zelensky spoke to him while he was there. And I would imagine that they want him sidelined, right? They want to make sure that he's under control and that he's not being groomed by the US or anyone else. Not that would be any better for this situation, because Zaluzhny is a committed Banderite fascist, right? He is a full scale. He had 2 busts of Stepan Bandera and one of Shukovich and the red and black flag in his office when he was the commander-in-chief of the military.
Zaluzhny was being threatened with jail time. Correct me if I'm wrong, he's been threatened with jail time. Basically, if you come back and run against me.
He was being threatened with all kinds of BS investigations and yes, all sorts of legal proceedings and everything else. I mean, look at once again, Zelensky, the Zelensky regime charged the leaders of all the major opposition parties, even opposition Maidan parties, with treason, including the former leader of the Kiev regime, the candy oligarch Poroshenko. And while the West, convinced him to quietly drop that affair, since the Kellogg and then Trump brought up elections in Ukraine again, they increased the pressure again, and suddenly, Poroshenko is wanted for treason again. So he is trying to take any potential political opponent off the table. But even so, if they did have elections, right? Elections, quote unquote, with all real non-Maidan opposition banned in the country, right? Which is, not real elections. It's sham elections. It's like everything that has happened in Ukraine since the West-backed Maidan putsch, and the voices of East Ukrainians were lustrated and silenced and pogromed and everything else. That way, only more so. But that would take months and months and months, assuming that someone just doesn't get rid of Zelensky. The shield of protection is off of Zelensky, right? The U.S. shield of protection. And the U.S. has openly indicated they want someone else. Knives could easily come out in Ukraine over this, right? There's lots of people that support the regime, right? In general, the Maidan regime, but hate Zelensky, right? A lot of political opponents, right, that have been, enduring this tin pot delusional emperor for quite a while because he had U.S. support. Now he doesn't have it, and he might have full-throated European support, right? But is that enough to protect him? I don't think so.
Well, from my point of view, Europe can have $20 trillion. You still got to buy the weapons from somewhere. And if America says no, then what?
Also, not only that, but let's say they were able to buy all the way. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the manpower, right?
How long can they last?
They still are dancing around a mobilization of down to 18-year-olds, right? Because of the domestic political repercussions, because they've got this demographic narrowing and there'll be no future for the country when these young men die, so on and so on. It's a tough situation. But the hope is still to drag the U.S. into this. And Europe, after agreeing supposedly now among themselves with the coalition of the willing, they're going to Washington, D.C. again this week.
Are they?
Rehash the same thing again, right? Supposedly with a stronger show of force and commitment of troops this time, but they still are going to demand a U.S. backstop. They're going to say, we'll pay for it, right? With what? Debt. They're all, all the European powers are ridiculously in debt, right? They don't have the military industrial complex. They can't, even the U.S. can't. Right? How many times has it been said already by the NATO secretary in general? Even with the U.S., Russia is outcompeting all of NATO put together in military industrial terms for the type of weapons needed for this conflict by 3 times. That's even with the U.S., right?
Mark, question
now
on the UK. So correct me if I'm wrong. The UK signed a 100-year agreement with Ukraine. Part of that agreement included mineral rights. So how are they also doing mineral rights with the United States?
It's all fiction.
Nonsense.
The 100-year security agreement was fiction. This mineral rights deal was fiction. This is all meant to rope the U.S. back into this conflict. No, this is all what all of this is about, right?
Also, Europe is, what I don't get is that Ukraine is losing the war.
Yeah.
Even the West acknowledges that they were losing the war at this point, meaning if the negotiations are purely on the issue of Ukraine, then there are no negotiations. Russia's perfectly content to keep going, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
Certainly they know, just gaming it out, that Russia has the target. Any European troop that comes in, because it's a nose under the camel's tent if they don't. So when these guys are out there saying we're going to put troops in, they have to know that this is effectively, you are risking a third world war.
Okay, they don't know that. They don't know that. They don't believe that.
How can they not know that?
They live in their own delusional world, right? So they've got fallbacks of logic. First one, if we put our troops on the ground, that's NATO troops on the ground protected by Article 5, and Russia, whatever they say, won't dare to attack our troops in Ukraine. 2, if they do attack our troops, whatever Trump may say now, he'll be forced to come and save us. So they're there, if not as a deterrent, then as a human tripwire. They never expect, and third, a lot of them read their papers, read even their top generals. They're all delusional, right? The heads of their military, everything, they still believe that they have some great military forces and that
That's
Russians
amazing.
are fighting, which they buy into their own problem. You've got different layers of delusion and arguments. If you read their articles, their papers, their statements that they fall back on, but they do not accept the World War III argument, right? They are convinced that Russia will back down, and if they don't back down, then Big Brother United States will come to their rescue. That is their belief, and they are willing to risk World War III because they are not willing to accept losing to Russia and terms in this conflict being dictated even 70% by Russia. They said it outright. We do not, Schultz said it, Starmer said it, we will not accept the demilitarization of Ukraine. To the contrary, we're going to pump Ukraine so full of theoretical future weapons that it will be the pillar of European security, i.e., it will be a de facto NATO battle platform for us into the future against Russia, and Russia will, of course, not accept that. The most cynical of the European people will be saying, we know Russia won't accept this. We want the war to continue because maybe some black swan event will happen, and maybe the 25,000th sanction will be the one that breaks the Russian economy's back and it will all be over, right? Something like that. Or ultimately the U.S. will get drawn in and then we'll defeat Russia and it will all be over. They cannot accept losing to Russia in Ukraine.
So given what happened, I'm sorry to interrupt. Given what happened, how do you think this turns out then? I mean, is this okay? There is no peace deal. There won't be a peace deal.
Zelensky there was never going to be a peace deal. There was never going to be a peace deal.
It's solved on the battlefield.
Yes, it was always going to be solved on the battlefield because
I guess
the Russian terms could never be accepted not even by a U.S. president. Right?
But see, Trump would have accepted those terms because Trump didn't care. The issue is Zelensky in Europe.
That's not necessarily true because Trump was always making statements about arms for Ukraine, and he was making statements, we'll get most of Ukraine's land back for them, all of these things. You know, when Russia presented their arguments about Donetsk, Lugansk, Crimea, Kherson, Zaporozhye, demilitarization, denazification, denuclearization, all of that, right? There's no way that could have all been accepted. And Russia, they've sacrificed too much to accept any less, right? Yeah. They've said it again and again, right? Putin would accept enormous political damage. It would be the end of Putin politically if when the Russian people saw victory and he backed down for some deal with Trump and half-arsed promises, right? And handshakes, which would be declared a Minsk III, right? In Russia, which is, Russians won't accept that, right? They taste victory, right? They're and I believe that in the Kremlin, they ultimately see that we cannot coexist with this regime, right? We tried so many times, right, to come to a political settlement, and it's impossible. So the only way is to remove it root and branch, because if this ends and this regime isn't gone and NATO doubles down on, its support of it, whether it's, officially in NATO or not, that's almost moot, then, our problems don't go away. In fact, they will only become worse, right? And for our national security and for the future of all the Ukrainians that aren't Banderites, right? We have to see this through to the end, because there is going ultimately to be no other peace in Ukraine or for us until this Banderite regime is rooted out of Kiev, and probably as far as Lvov, root and branch.
So how far do you think they plan on going? This is take over the entirety of Ukraine. It's basically except guerrilla war.
Oh yeah, that was. Go back to my very first interviews on this conflict in 2022. Right? In March, the first week of March, and I'm sitting next to some other, alt media people who speak about the military, right? And in some bombastic terms, who lined up and said that it would all be over in 2 months. And they came to me, and I said, it will be a forever war, right? Quote unquote, forever war. It is very unlikely that we will see real peace in Ukraine for the rest of our lives, right? Whether it's a frozen conflict, a guerrilla war, hot war, war with the West directly, it Humpty Dumpty has broken, and all the hegemon's horses and all the hegemon's men can't put Ukraine back together again.
Do you think Trump is going to be able to normalize relations while the war goes on?
That will be hard, but he's successfully ignoring the Democrats and the press right now, right? Yeah. He now has the shield of saying that Zelensky and all of Europe gave him the big middle finger, right? So it won't be easy, right? But he has the capability, and he has at least shown part of the gumption to actually walk away from this. Now, I said just months ago on here that no U.S. president could walk away from it. And now I have reassessed. Trump could do that, right? Will he do that? That's the question. Look, as far as they were concerned, even this mineral deal was them implicitly making security guarantees to Ukraine, right? A lot of people think that Trump is somehow just wants to agree to all the Russian terms. No, Trump has his own unique sense of what U.S. national interests are, right? Some things I agree with, some things I don't, but he's not pro-multipolarism, people. He's not a good guy. There is no good guy, right? You can't elect Coke or Pepsi and elect Coke or instead of Pepsi or the like, and all the world's problems. He is still the U.S. president. And if we have a U.S. retrenched Western Hemisphere empire instead of a U.S.-led Western hegemony in pursuit of primacy and hegemony, it might be better for Russia in the short term, right, in the consideration of the Ukraine conflict. But it doesn't mean that that's necessarily a better flavor of American empire for all the rest of us and all the world. He's still the leader of the U.S. And the problem is the U.S., right? I mean, sorry, Americans. I'm an ex-American, right? You're an American, but
I'm an American currently, yeah.
I mean, the U.S. has been this disruptive power on the world stage, for a long period of time, going back to the genocide of the Native Americans and slavery and everything else, and taking land, if not from the Indians, then from the Spanish and everyone else who took it from the Indians and Mexico and so forth, all the way to the Philippines, and now then post 45 becoming the superpower and then the global hegemon. The forms change, but the U.S. role in that, and until the U.S. is diminished, right, economically, resulting in military diminishment, you'll never have that. That's a brutal world of real politic, right?
Yeah.
Of realism. Yeah.
Mark, man, I always enjoy these conversations, man. I really do. Mark Sleboda, he's an international relations and security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sleboda1. You can check him out on his YouTube channel, Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. And you can also find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. My man, thank you for this, Mark. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You too. Be safe. My